Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? Welcome everyone to episode 15 of Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case. That is the second episode in season 2. Melissa Ellis, of course, is here alongside me. I don't know about you, Melissa, but after last week's episode, I am just really pumped, right? We've been kind of clear about our goals around season 2, and that we're going to let the season unfold organically, which is challenging for us because we're planners.
Absolutely.
Right? And that we have, even though we have some general thoughts about what's important, the things we agree that we can't not delve into, we also know there are going to be ideas and critical topics for discussion that reveal themselves as we move forward. But before we talk about, the interview that we're doing today, I want to go back real quick and then certainly ask you to do the same if there's any revelations from last week. So since we taped last week's episode, I actually had an opportunity to put my learning to use by using my voice in a really personal way. I had dinner with some girlfriends, outdoors, socially distanced, fortunately 2 weeks before San Diego shut down again, because now as of today we're shut down again, right? And in it, it's a group of women who are so dear to me, but we don't talk about race, right? Usually. And so I brought it up, of course, I have to live what we're learning and what we're saying. And it was really interesting because one of my friends brought up that she said, "I'm so glad you kind of brought this up because I've had this interesting conversation." And she recounted a conversation she and her husband had with another couple. The husbands work together. They are a Black couple, and that's only important because she went on to say how he really spent some time with them. He really wanted to talk about his kind of thinking around, everything that's happening right now and the protesting and this idea of systemic racism, because he doesn't agree with it as a Black man. He, kind of just said, I've done just fine for myself. My family's done just fine. I think it's being blown out of proportion. And, and I'll be a white woman who admits, I was kind of going, are you sure he's Black? And it really was an opportunity to realize, you said this so beautifully in the last episode, that, no two people think alike, and no two people think alike just because of the color of their skin, for example.
Exactly.
But the thing he pushed, which was really interesting, he kind of dug into the dynamics of the Black family and talked about part of the problem was that we needed to improve communities. We needed to give resources to help Black people move out of poverty. Okay, I agree with that. But then he went into how part of the biggest issue is that there are so many single Black mothers, and that the reason there are so many single Black mothers is because they have learned to take advantage of welfare, and so they have babies in order to get money. Wow. And Melissa, I was like, wow. Whoa, what? So everything from our conversation, right, was in my head. I was all like, okay, right. Listen calmly. Listen, it's not even my friend's perspective. She's quoting someone else, but right. Listen, let her get it all out. It's important to model this idea that we all are going to have different perspectives. How do we hear each other? But because I had just listened to an episode of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, where Emmanuel H.O. went into actually this exact idea. And he talked about the history of the single parent family in the Black community and how it ties all the way back to slavery, right? Because, of course, when Africans came over, were brought over, if they were already a family unit, they were forced apart. If they lived, if they weren't and they tried to build families, oftentimes they were forced apart, right? A husband sent to another plantation, for example, a mother left with children on her own, etc. So he actually talked about how it's such a misconception that the single motherhoodness, if you will, of Black women has to do with current circumstances, and instead tied it all the way back there. And so I was able to share that with her. And the conclusion we came to was, this is why it's so important that each of us no matter where we hear something from, no matter the source, we have to go look it up and figure it out for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Because it's, this idea like we can't just listen to somebody because of their title, their position, their expertise, the color of their skin, whatever it is, right? We have to go find out for ourselves. So again, I just had our episode in my head and I was like, this right here, right? This is why this conversation is so pertinent. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that it does indeed also have a lot to do with current situations, because systemic racism has that impact. It has the impact of keeping blacks in poverty. It has that idea of incarcerating more black men than any other race. So that's tearing apart families.
Absolutely.
And you'll get the people who say, well, if they weren't committing crimes, and we've also got historical data that says that they're not always committing crimes, and that even when they are sentenced and judged a lot more harshly than others of different races. So there's all that stuff, which is exactly what we're fighting, right? At the end of the day, but like you said, Janice, we said in that other episode that Black people are not monolith. We don't all think the same. We also said that no one Black person is the spokesperson for all Black people. So if you hear something that just makes you cringe or makes you question, then you're absolutely right. That is your cue to go do the work. There's so much information out there about welfare and who takes advantage of it the most, which happens to be whites, by the way. But we are so quick to just buy into whatever it is that makes it make sense for us.
That's it.
And makes it easier. And so I love that. I love that story. I love that you were given the opportunity to use what we've been saying, because that is proof positive that it works. That is proof positive that we can have these conversations no matter how difficult they may be, if we simply choose to do so. And that was a really major thing. So I'm really glad to hear that you're able to use some of those things in your conversation with your friends.
And it does remind me, and I think maybe down the road, one of our conversations can be about, very specifically last time using your voice. And we got into how to have hard conversations, but maybe even more so just about that idea, regardless of around what reason. Because you're right, like even knowing all of that, I had to tell myself in my head sitting there, just be quiet, just let her finish. She's got to get, she needs to be able to express and be heard. It's hard to do. It's hard. And I've had a lot of practice, but it's hard. So anyway, so flashing forward then. So today, of course, we're going to have the pleasure of talking with our close friend, Melvin Brown, who we've both known for a hot minute. And I'm really excited because I feel like after last week's conversation, we knew we had a couple of things kind of queued up that could be possible for the second episode, like order, right? How we're being delivered on that. And then we both agreed that, why not start with the end in mind? And by that, I mean, this idea of where are we trying to get, right? And of course, where we're trying to get is the dismantling of systemic racism in this country. And the work to getting there, of course, is going to take so many different forms. But today we're going to talk with our friend Melvin about unity, right? Which is a place that we can only get if we, in fact, dismantle racism, right? Like systemic racism, like we can't get there without it. But we want to, it's kind of a flash forward, right? At least as a starting point, right? So to begin to think about. So I think that's kind of the purpose of today, is to flash forward and think about what's possible as we begin or continue, doing the hard work that is and will continue to be dismantling racism. Do you feel like that captures it? Is that a good way to capture it for everybody?
I think that's the perfect way to say it. And I think the thing that we both know and love about Melvin is that he does have a bigger picture view. So I'm excited to see what it is that he sees as that bigger picture and some of his suggestions on how we get there. And because that bigger picture view is indeed where we hope to end up. So I'm excited to hear.
Me too. Right now, in this moment in this country, we are asking a lot of questions, and we're asking a lot of questions of ourselves, right? So to that end, for all of you listening, we hope you'll find this conversation with Melvin Brown beneficial to your own understanding of this concept of unity. Let's get to it. All right, welcome everybody, and welcome especially, of course, to Melvin Brown, who is joining us today. And I'm really excited because throughout the course of this season, season 2, there'll be times when I'm doing interviews solo, but there are going to be lots of times where I'm joined by Melissa, and you all know Melissa Ellis by now, so that we can both make sure that we, frankly, get the most out of each of these conversations with the folks who are taking the time and spending it with us. So, Melvin, we've had a couple of conversations since Melissa and I reached out to talk with you, to see if you would talk with us, that is. And it's just, I'm just going to start by saying how grateful I am to have this kind of reconnection with you, and ask you to start by saying, okay, tell us a little bit about yourself. And we're going to be talking about unity today. So why is that important to you?
Well, hello all. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here talking with you all. Of course, friends for a very long time, a lot of years, right? I'm not even going to put the number up there.
It starts with a 3 and then it just goes.
Stops there. All right. So anyway, again, thank you. I didn't do one thing, Janice.
Okay.
Tell my little one that I'm in a podcast.
You know what? That's real.
He can't talk to me right now.
That's real. So you just tell him, and we're going to pick it up right here. Like, that's just real. I'm going to pause this for 1 second. Here we go.
You were so smooth with that.
He was smooth. I didn't even have to push pause, but I pushed pause. We're back now, and we are not at risk. Well, in theory, we're not at risk of Melvin's little one coming into the conversation, but you know what? If he does, we're just going to put him right in it and ask him some questions. That's how that's going to go down. Anyway, tell us a little bit about you, Melvin.
Take off, for sure.
That's true. He'll probably steal the show. I have no doubt about it. So what tell us about you?
Okay, again, so that's a big question, but for the nature of this conversation, I would say that I felt called to create this live show experience called Spirituality Night Live, because I wanted to figure out a way for us to get down and do the real deep work so that we could go to our next level of evolving or just being a little bit better on the planet. And then, of course, in the middle of maybe my 3rd show, then this stuff happens where America is on fire, and it's right here bringing to our awareness something that is exactly the type of thing that would have to teach you how to go inside and come out with steps to be a better, decent human being on the planet. So that's why I'm here. It is about unity. Ironically, the program that I am in is in a facility called Unity of Fredericksburg. So unity is the purpose. Unity is the way. So thank you.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you, Melvin. I appreciate that. And it was seeing your kind of introduction of the show that you're doing that kind of drew us to you. And I already had you in my mind anyway as somebody who's important to me and who I've learned from over the years. And so it just kind of worked out perfectly. So, let's start then, right? We've already talked about, our listeners know from episode 1 that why Melissa and I said, okay, so season 2's got to be about this, right? At least. Who knows, Melissa? Season 20 might be about this, right? We'll see how. Right. Don't you love when I foreshadow and suggest there are going to be 20 seasons? I'm an optimist. What can I say? But we knew, and after talking with Melvin, I knew this needed to be next up because we kind of got to it without talking about it last week, which is this idea that the goal, right, is that we can live in unity together, right? That and we're going to get to what that looks like, etc. So I want you to start us off, though, Melvin, if you don't mind, and then I'm going to ask Melissa to come in, after that to follow up. But I want to hear from you, especially about when we say unity, right? What does that look like? That's important to me because I feel like we use a lot of words a lot of time, and people are like, oh yeah, unity, that's great, but let's have a kind of agreed upon like what it looks like. What does that mean exactly to you?
Right now, I've got Dave Chappelle episodes stuck in my head with Rick James and you. I'm sorry.
Go. We said this was organic. We said organic.
There's so many ways to identify unity. But for me, unity is about coming together as all people. It transcends the whole race part. It is to embrace the idea of the one race, the human race.
Yeah.
To be there,
That's it.
to be there where color is just something of beauty and culture, and not something to fear or to be better than one another.
Yeah.
It's true, hand to hand. I see you, I honor you, I love who you are and what you are, and I want to know more about you. That's unity to me.
I love that. I love the human race piece, and I'm glad we're going to dig into that, because I feel like we're hearing that a lot, right? We're the human race, and again, I do feel like there are those out there who might go, oh my gosh, that's too touchy feely, that's too whatever, and yet it's the reality, right? Like, we are all the human race, and so how do we start to act like it? Right? How do we actually start to live up to it, if you will? So Melissa, pick up on that, and then I want you, if you don't mind, to kind of expand us into, so if that's what it looks like, if that's what it means, what does it feel like, right, when we get there? What are we aspiring to?
Absolutely. I want to say, first of all, Melvin, thank you for joining us. I wanted to be able to say that to you again, because I know I've said it a few times, but it's really beautiful to have someone here that has your light. You have a light that I'm not sure you even realize you have. So I thank you for sharing it with us. It's necessary. To answer the question, though, in terms of what unity looks like and feels like for me, while I love the idea of us all being a part of the human race, because it's just a fact, that's what we are. I think that in the midst of all that's going on, like Janice said, some people may view that as being too new agey or being too idealistic. I think it's a viable goal. I think it's what we should all be aiming for. The question, though, is how do we get there? What steps should we take? And what does that truly look like? Because as I've said in previous conversations, unity, the way most people view it, is a very unrealistic thing.
Yeah.
For most people, when they think of unity, they think of everybody, just being together and loving one another and, working towards the same goals. And that is not something that has ever happened in the history of the world, like anywhere. Because we are not monoliths. We are people. We are. So the thing that is actually our goal is also the thing that prevents us from getting there in the way that we hope to get there. The fact that we are all people, we are all individuals with individual thoughts and feelings and goals and desires and beliefs makes it very hard for us all to come together and have the exact same path. I don't know that will ever happen, that we'll all have the same path, or even that we'll all have the same goal. So I think for me and for a lot of people today, unity looks more like getting with people who have a like mind, who have that same goal that I have, who has the same thoughts and ideas, and working towards the goal that we want. That doesn't mean you exclude people who don't have the same ideals or same thoughts or same goals. You do try to work with them, but you can't waste precious time trying to change people's ideas and still get the work done. So I'm not saying we shouldn't try to change people's ideas. I'm saying that can't be our main focus. The main focus right now has to be getting the work done with like-minded individuals. So I think that it's a very messy process, but that's what being human is. Humanism is messy. Humanity is messy because we all bring so much to the table. We're diverse. Yeah. We're different, and we're not a monolith. And so I think that the first thing that, for me to say what it looks like those who agree, who have the same mindset, the same thoughts, ideas, goals, dreams, etc., working together to reach them. And I think what it feels like is being able to be who I am, regardless of who likes it or who doesn't like it, and still being respected as a human being. So again, we keep coming back to that human being piece because it's the core of the whole issue, but it's also the thing that makes it kind of difficult. And I know that sounds like a bunch of words and revolving doors, but hopefully I got that point across a little bit.
Yeah.
Good, Melvin.
Yeah, I can follow that too. I see that, and I may have mentioned this before because I like to mention this because I'm kind of that person who is into the astrology part of things, and as an Aquarian person, being my sun sign, I have this automatic connection to seeing the future and what it looks like beyond where we are right now. And in that future model for me, also comes in an idea of a higher level of consciousness. And in that level of consciousness, at least with the people of maybe like minds of my own that I play around with, we understand that if you transcend the idea of this separateness, we go more into the wholeness, and that can't be separated as this or that. It is all part of a whole. And though we are not there yet, understanding that idea is what helps us take steps to evolve to that next place, which in my mind, the idea of unity could exist at that level where we as a people are working on the next part of what it is. And this whole black-white thing going on right now, to me, is just a perfect example of one of the easiest steps to come together. Because if we can't come together here, I think it's going to be really hard for us to come together at other places where it's not so obvious for the equality that is needed. So So it's a tricky question to answer depending upon what you think the total end of it is. And in this universe of forever potentiality, nothing is the total end. We're always going to be improving, growing, and being better and more. That's just the nature of life itself, and that cycle of we're either growing or we're dying. And I'm growing. So
yeah, I'm in the growing group. That's where I'm hoping to be. I'm in the growing group. Yeah.
You know, I think it's very. I love what you said about the way the future looks. The vision of the future is us all being on a higher consciousness, and I think that absolutely that has to start with people realizing that we are all one. Like we are all connected. We are all one, connected to regardless of your beliefs. Connected to a source, whether you believe that source to be a religious thing or whether you just believe it to be energy or you just believe it to be the universe. But ultimately, like, we all come from someone, something, however you believe, and we're all connected. Like when you start tracing lines, it's sort of like it's all blurred and jumbled because yes, we are human. That's the one thing that we know is true. Everything else that we know is perception. Like this whole idea of race, this whole idea, it's all a construct. It really is. But because we've had so many years of it, people are going to have to learn to overcome that, which is very hard to do when there is not equality, when there is oppression. It's hard to view yourself the same as everyone else when you're not being treated the same as everyone else. And so that's where and I agree, Melvin, like if we could tackle this, if we can't tackle this, something as basic as people getting equal human rights, like if we can't, we're in trouble. We're in trouble to try to tackle anything greater. Like that is at the core of us as people. We should know how it feels when we're not treated well. And we shouldn't want that for anyone else. Yet we have members of our society who don't see that as an issue and who think that it's just, something that people of color or blacks have made up. We've created this idea in our heads that racism is real instead of kind of looking at it and realizing that it's a true thing. So I think that there's much work to be done.
Absolutely.
You when you were talking earlier, Melissa, I kind of had this idea in my head, right? Like Melvin, when you talk about unity, I feel like it's a really big idea, right? And I appreciated your emphasis on the idea that we have to see it as a whole, right? If we can only see ourselves individually in it, right, and we can't see the whole, then it's going to be hard to achieve it. And then when you were talking, Melissa, I thought to myself, this idea of realistic unity, right? Because you were talking initially about like, yes, we're all one race, for example, and as you just said, we're all connected. Um, that said, we're all very unique. We're not monoliths. We're very different. And so a part of what we're calling on, right, as we endeavor to think about this idea of unity is for us to be willing to look beyond our individuality, our own set of beliefs, and see and understand someone else's in order to be more unified, maybe. But you mentioned, or you said, and we might have to focus on kind of being with the people who agree with that goal and are working toward it and not spend so much energy trying to convince people who don't not to, which is what made me think about kind of realistic unity, right? But it also made me think about the research behind this idea of building on our strengths, right? Oftentimes when we think about our strengths and our weaknesses individually and collectively, we go to weaknesses to work on them. Like, I got to work on my weaknesses. But what you described is really harnessing the strengths, right, that we have.
Absolutely.
And leveraging those to move us more toward unity. And not focus necessarily on the weakness, right? So those were some of the things.
I think that's necessary because right now, with the state of the world the way it is, and I don't want to just say the state of of the country, because anti-Blackness is a global problem. It's not specific to the United States.
Right.
So right now, with the state of the world, while I really truly love this idea of humanity and one and this global idea of unity, we have stuff that has to get done right now.
Yeah.
And so it's the way I think we approach any goal. Any goal that you have, if you want to meet it, the best way to meet it is to break it up.
Yep.
You break it up, you set out, how you want to do it, and then you make the steps to, make it happen. You can't just say, for example, I want to lose 50 pounds and then wait for that 50 pounds to fall off.
Right.
You have to decide, okay, well, first I'm going to lose 5. And then and this is how I'm going to lose the 5. So I think that in order to get to the point where we need to be, which is taking actual steps and seeing actual action, we can't wait for people to come on board. We can't wait for people to unite. We can't wait for this idea that that we're all going to come together. As much as we hope and wish that it would happen, we really, in my opinion, don't have time to wait for that right now. We can work towards it while we're taking steps to get stuff done. And I think that's where my mindset is anyway, is I want to see action. I have a child. I know we all do. I want change for him right now. Yeah. Like, I don't want this to be something that he is still fighting for when he's 50. Like I'm almost 50. I don't want that. And my grandmother fought for this. My mother fought for this. Like, here we are going into, generation how many? Right. Without seeing real change. We're being pacified, but we're not seeing real change. So I think we have to focus on what it's going to take right now to make real change, and then hope that each of those steps then leads us to that beautiful idea of connectedness, of unity. Right.
What are you thinking, Melvin?
Mm-hmm. I get that. I see that. And I think it's interesting because those steps are kind of the parts that I'm looking for as practical steps. Yes. To show people on day-to-day things. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, being the 9th of July, I will do a show which is going to be part 2 from my guest last week, who was talking about actual practical steps in this particular, and we just unpacked a whole bunch, and I really didn't get to what I wanted to get to, so I'm going to do it again tomorrow because she has actionable steps that I think are great. But I think my nature as a spiritual practitioner really makes me see the world through the lens, the best way that I can, of the other sages and saints, and where my heart is where I'm being guided in my heart to focus on is to do the deepest work as the individual can And that is the spiritual walk from the head to the heart. And in that place, you realize that you are not as separate as you think, because it's the ego. It's the ego that's in pain. It's the ego that needs something more. It's the ego that needs to feel this or that. It's the ego that lives in duality, in the separation. And for me, I just kind of see that however I can encourage people to leave their head and find ways to go to their heart so that the compassion is activated. And within that, there's something, the acronym is C, it's called a significant emotional event. The moment something like that happens with a person, a paradigm shift occurs and they go, oh, now I see. And that is, to me, the best thing that could actually happen to kind of make people see that we're together a little bit more. For example, because it's about race and all, and though, there are some people now who are saying that they're seeing some things happening, there's more things happening now than there was in the civil rights in the 60s. But let's not forget that it wasn't just like my utopia idea of unity for all that actually made people change. It didn't. It was actually a significant emotional event that helped it happen.
Yeah.
Whether it was Emmett Till,
Yep.
what his mother was so brave enough to allow.
Absolutely.
Or if it was even the assassination of Dr. King, which was not liked by a lot of people, black or white. We're talking
Right.
about a man who got stabbed in his heart by another black woman. So it isn't until something bad happens that it allows people to drop down. Also, it's about, for me, it's about embracing that darkness. It's about going and not being afraid of that pain and that emotion, and tapping into it is where we get our biggest lessons of life. And this is what I'm seeing in the world happen right now. Just like the Tao symbol, the yin and yang, the white and the black, they're just mixed together. This is something that's been out there for the longest time. It is not an emblem for the military alone. It isn't just something you see on a karate gi. It has significant importance. It isn't one without the other. One, you cannot have one side or the other side. You cannot have the separation. You must have the two together. One pushes the other to get the motion, to make it happen. It is the white embracing the black embracing the white, and working together to make it happen. In another sense, now this may be too woo-woo, but this is just where I am.
I'll rein you
with
in
things.
if it is. Don't worry.
Okay, all right. Just like we as the world now are dealing with these black and white issues, and it's being projected about black and white skin, there's something else that's going on here, and it's the emergence of the black soul. And there's a white soul here as well that sees things a particular way, with the light, with the right, with the rules, with the morals. They're upset about the violence. They're upset about seeing things go a particular way. But that blackness, that darkness, that pain, not just skin color, that other stuff is what helps. They have to come together. They have to work together. You have to, let's just look at it this way. America did not become America on nice rules alone.
Right.
They came over and brought violence.
Right.
Violence isn't just physical. Violence isn't just what the police officers did to George Floyd. Violence comes in words. Violence comes in racism. And when you deal with that violence, as black people have for a very long time, they're going to respond in a particular way. And it's like now the white part of us, whether you're a white person or whatever, has to embrace that darkness and understand that it is a part of us. And when you get into that, that is when the evolution occurs and you realize that you are all one. And that is when the biggest work in my world, through the probably just through the people of the like mind that I stick with, as you were saying, Melissa, because I got a network of other people who see it like that too. It's just, and I see those people getting beat up when they're asking questions like, "Can you tell me some stories?" You know, and about racism or whatever, because they're just genuine people who really want to know how it works, because from their world, they have no idea about the racism that actually happens on a day-to-day basis. They don't understand. So they want to know more stuff. They want to know the darkness. They want to know the pain, because that's how we transcend. Yeah. Is when we embrace the toughest, hardest things and we go through them, we level up. And so that's kind of where I am right now, with embracing both the dark part and the white part, embracing itself. I believe Lao Tzu said a quote that was similar to, "It is the light that has to be reminded, be mindful of the darkness, or embrace the darkness in order to have total everything." And this was an Asian guy, not talking about white people, dark people. Right. It's the soul. It's what comes from it. There is such a thing as having too much light, you know. There is. Yeah. And when I say light,
and you can't appreciate light without knowing dark. Like, that's just the truth. If it's, you know, it's a very common thing. You can't appreciate joy if you don't know pain. You can't appreciate gain if you haven't lost. Like, yeah, I think that's very true. I think the thing, Melvin, that I would ask you then is, what part does willingness play? Because I think that there is so much information out there, even in regards to what you were saying about, you know, people potentially getting attacked when they ask questions. I think people tend to forget that the oppressed is not responsible for educating. So,
and they're tired.
They're very tired, extremely frustrated, angry, all of that. And so, and I think we've talked about this before. I don't remember if we just kind of talked about it in
Let's
Zoom.
Talk about it again.
Yeah, let's talk about it again. It's this idea that it's 2020. Yeah. We're in the age of information. Like, every last one of us just about walks around with a mini computer in our pockets all day long, or at our fingertips in our cell phone. We spend 80% of our day on social media arguing, playing with games, doing memes, whatever, when Google is just as accessible with all this information. If you want stories of racism, a simple Google search can give it to you. It doesn't require a person who is already dealing with oppression, a person who's already dealing with all the heavy emotions that come to the oppressed during a time like this. It doesn't require me pulling up my painful stories to educate someone who could just as easily find it on Google. Like, you're asking an oppressed person to relive traumas for your edification, which to me is a selfish move. And I'm not saying specifically, you know, every person you're talking about. I'm just saying that mindset that, well, let me just go ask you to tell me stories. It's one thing if I'm willing to do that. If I'm not willing, that doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't make me wrong. That doesn't make me a problem, because I have my reasons for not wanting to relive those traumas or bring up those pains, or maybe I'm not as educated. Janice and I talked about this last week. I'm not the Black spokesperson. Like, the person you're going to is not the Black spokesperson. So if you really truly want to know, you can find out without, you know, a person having to tell you. And so I think, taking it back to my question, is I think what you're speaking of, and what we're all talking about, this idea of unity, however it looks, requires a willingness. And if a group of people or a person is not willing to learn, how much time and energy can we afford to spend trying to convince them when there's all this work over here that needs to be done? I think that's my only, like, that's my biggest fear in this idea that we should strive for global unity right now. That, I'll be completely honest with you, that's my fear, is that we will do what we've done forever, which is say, well, you know, and hopefully, Melvin, you specifically know what I'm talking about, because this is a really big issue in the Black community. This idea that Black people can't unite, that we are always trying to pull one another down and we can't unite. It's that whole what's called a crab in the barrel syndrome. And the reason that's so problematic is, again, all Black people are not the same. So we're not always going to be on the same page. We're not going to have the same ideas. We're not going to completely unify. And so you have people who are like, well, Black people can't get it together and come together, so I'm not going to worry about it. So if that's the idea we have, that, well, we'll wait for global unity, and when everybody gets on the same page, then the world will be better, how are we ever going to get to that place?
Yeah, so I'm reminded of my days in sales from years ago, when someone would come up to you and tell you, yeah, well, I ain't buying this today. And they were the first people that would buy. The reason I say that is what I found, what usually comes out of people's mouth first is the very objection that you need to overcome and help them with so that you can sell them. I say that because what I notice on Facebook now is I've grown up in the last 4 years, and I stopped blocking and unfriending people that had an opinion different than mine. Now I just sit back and I watch, and I actually try to see beyond what they're screaming about and see how to overcome what it is that they're talking about. Because what I see people coming out with is the very thing that they're asking to see it and understand it differently, while being fearful to hold on to the idea that they already have. Out of that, a person, if you look into it, you will see someone's really trying to know something a little bit different. And maybe they shouldn't ask you, Melissa, because you're tired.
I'm tired.
But there are other people that may be more like-minded like them. Maybe Janet can answer that for them. You might even have the patience, like I see you respond on them sometimes, because you're in it too and you get it. You may have the patience and can point it out to people, because though the information is out there, we're in this beautiful age in the world where the wisdom of the word that has been given to us is just so true. What you seek is also looking for you. You will find what you seek. So if it's in your heart to find a particular something, you're going to find things to back that up. It just is. We can go and find stuff now where they say water isn't healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just where we are. And so if you don't already know, you're not going to be able to find that information necessarily. Because look at how many people, let's just take the Confederate flag. Look at how many people see it a different way than I see it, and can find the research to say what this flag is or not. So I'd like to just hold people's hands a little bit more for those that are willing, because look how long it's taken us to get here so far. It's taken a long time. And now I'm seeing people wake up at a rate that it hasn't been before. And I'm watching people, the more patient I am with people, the more that they're saying those things because they want to see something differently. I can't say that I've seen a total shift from all of them, but they're there and they're trying. They're trying to understand something that is totally foreign to them. They just don't get it. They just don't see it, period. And I can empathize with that, because it's a good thing I want them, because I'm the most hard-headed person that I know. It would take a whole bunch to convince me differently than what it is that I know. So I need somebody to be patient enough with me to explain it to me. If I'm in the game saying something, hey, no, I don't believe it, what's coming out my mouth is an invitation for you to help me figure out something. It's when I'm quiet that you got to worry about it, because I ain't telling you anything for you to see. And I might just go on and continue being a different way. So I see it a little bit differently than I did before. I see it as almost a challenge. I see it as back again, oh, you telling me you ain't gonna buy anything today? Well, they call me Full Down Brown for a reason. You gonna buy stuff today, you watch. And that's just how I go about it. And the next thing you know, I've got people calling and wanting to know more, and I am just I'm just filled up with a lot of optimism about it, and I can see the difference. I mean, I see the change. I see it. I don't know, maybe it's my queer nature, maybe it's just me wanting to see the world that way, but I just know that this world is ever evolving, ever going, and and all of these issues are like small issues, because the real thing that's going on is about transcending the ego, and all of these things are really just ego things. Nothing more to me than a lesson to show you how to overcome, how to move past, how to go beyond. Because, and again, if we can't get this right about skin color, we'll never get it right about anything.
I agree. I want to say two quick things in response to that. One, Melvin, you say, hand holding their hands. I'm okay with that to some degree, but I think that without holding them accountable, then we're doing a disservice. So I think there has to be a balance. I don't think we can just hold people's hands, especially when we're talking about full-grown adults. We're not talking about kids who don't know how to research. We're not talking about children who don't have... Go ahead.
But look, y'all know, we went to the same school. Mm-hmm. We went to the same place that told us that the Civil War was about states' rights. Mm-hmm. And we know these same adults, that's what they know.
Yeah, that's
so
exactly
if they
right.
go look up something, they're going to just look up what it is that they already know.
Yeah.
I agree to a point, but then I don't, because I feel like and that's where I think willingness comes in, and that's been the recurring theme here is a willingness to learn. If you really want to learn, you won't go look up was the Civil War a states' rights issue. You'll look up the history of the Civil War and you'll read it all. That's research. That's not looking for what supports your opinion. And I think that's where holding people accountable that's exactly what I mean when I say holding them accountable versus just holding their hand. I'm not saying we can't hold the hand of the willing, truly willing. But I think they have to show that they are also willing to be held accountable. And then the second thing I wanted to say is that I think that where that becomes problematic, it's not, if you are willing to answer questions, great. The problem becomes when I am deemed angry, unwilling, in a nasty way because I don't want to, or because I think you should be willing to research it and find it on your own. What ends up happening a lot of times when you don't get someone willing to answer your questions, you just stop asking. Instead of saying, you know what, like I've seen Janice do, so I know it's possible. Okay, so Melissa, I know it's not your job to answer these questions for me, but do you mind answering them? If I were to tell Janice no, Janice would find another resource. Janice wouldn't say, well, I'm being attacked because I simply asked a question and now I'm never going to ask another question, which is what happens all too often. So I think those two things are very important points that need to be said, is that holding hands is great. Holding people accountable is great too. And the expectation is what needs to be removed, not the asking of questions. If you have someone in your life that you're comfortable asking questions with, and Janice can tell you, because we've had this conversation, I even had this conversation with my doctor, who I don't even know. It's not that I'm completely unwilling to answer questions. It's only that it's not my job. So if I choose not to, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not being a negative, presence just because I don't want to answer questions. It has to be someone that is willing to do so for you. So Absolutely. I just kind of
So here's what's important about what you two are offering right now for me, and hopefully the people who are listening, is different perspectives, right?
Right.
You're both living your own Black experience, and you have but you have somewhat different perspectives. And I appreciate that, because one of the things that I'm thinking about in my mind is why it's important. And Melissa, I want to be clear. You said this last week, but I'll say it for you again this week. And that is that you're most motivated to answer and support when you see people doing the work, when you see them That's trying. Right. They're not just looking for the easy way to be educated, right?
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But that this idea that as a white person, we have to constantly remind ourselves that shocker, no two black people think alike, just like no two white people think alike.
That's right.
And so we might have different perspectives. We want different perspectives, right? I love that you guys are giving us us different perspectives, and that that, you know, maybe today I asked you a question, but tomorrow I'm going to give you a break and I'm going to go do some research myself, or I'm going to ask someone else, or I'm going to try and get a different perspective. But I want to go back, Melvin. Several minutes ago, you introduced the idea of C, a significant emotional event. And I want to share from my experience, right? I can think of a couple that pertain to this. Part of the reason you're here, and I think I shared this with you, Melvin, when we had our kind of planning call, is that even though, you know, up until our 20th reunion, we had been pretty disconnected except for Facebook. And since then, we've had, you know, every couple of years we had a connection. It has been a couple of years since the last time I spoke to you, but the last time I spoke to you, you told me a story because you were on this spiritual journey. You had begun it, you were in it. And you told me about a realization you'd had about coming to understand. And the expression you used was, but for the grace of God, that if I had been raised in that man's household, if I had been surrounded by his beliefs, if his parents were my parents, I might very well act and believe exactly the way he does. Like it was a kind of an understanding of yours that before I, for lack of a better word, judge this person in front of me, I have to imagine what it was like to have walked in their shoes and try to understand why they believe the way they believe. And that was a significant emotional event for me. You did not know it at the time, I'm sure, because it made me think a little bit differently. But fast forward to now, and as I'm listening to you talk about that idea, I thought to myself, that is likely why so many of us, because we've asked the question, why George Floyd, right? He was not the first. He has not been the last. There will be many others until we do better. And God knows, I hope that's not true, but I'm trying to be realistic. And
No,
part of
that's
me
true.
wonders if that video from of George Floyd was the significant emotional event that many of us needed to kick us into high gear. That was in fact the thing. And Melissa, I want to tie that to this idea about how much you answer questions, how much you work, how much you whatever. And I'll say this, especially when it's possible that something you have to share, right? That could be a significant emotional event for somebody else. That I hope that folks will share them. And I'm going to give you a quick example. A Facebook friend who was a principal colleague of mine back in Virginia posted just yesterday on Facebook. He is a 50-year-old black man, and he was basically juggling for a parking spot at like a whatever store. And the other guy deferred, parked someplace else. But when he got out of his car, you know, was angry, was visibly angry. The other gentleman, about mid-60s, white guy. And this colleague friend of mine wrote a whole thing on Facebook. He's never done that before. He's never shared one of those experiences. I know it's not his first. It's likely not his last. But he talked about getting back into his car and just realizing, holy crap, like, this is where stuff starts, because the guy had reached in his car and brought out mace, and like it escalated so fast. And one of the last things he said was, anybody else looking at that, I wonder what somebody else looking at that would have thought. Would I have been the threat? Would he have been the threat? Right? And so I know him, and so that story means more to me than if it was even a stranger, right? As a stranger, and I've read many of those stories, I'd be like, oh my gosh, like this, we have to do better. But when I saw it from someone I know and care about, it meant even more, right? That kind of significant emotional event you're talking about. So I guess all of that to say that we can't expect, we've talked about this, right? This conversation and the work, frankly, should be resting on the shoulders of white people right now and being supported, perhaps, and cheered on, right? By people who've been oppressed for so long and who are exhausted, as you said, Melvin. But I do hope that stories like the one I read on Facebook, that will keep them coming, because it's the everyday reminder that every day it happens.
It is.
Yeah.
But I want to be very, very clear again. It's not that I'm saying don't answer questions.
Oh,
it's not that I'm saying
of course.
don't share your story.
Yeah.
It's the expectation that is tied to it that
Absolutely.
is problematic.
Agreed.
It is the expectation that I have to do that. It's the expectation that if I don't do that, then I'm somehow a problem.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Absolutely.
So again, I share, anybody who's on my Facebook, I share all kinds of stuff. I tell it all.
Yeah, you do.
I will share every experience, and I will answer questions for people, as Janice and I have talked about, who I feel are sincerely asking and willing. That word willing keeps coming up, because to me, that's the core of it. If you know, but there are people, especially on social media, who feel like it's the responsibility of Black people to somehow convince them that racism is real, to somehow convince them that Black on Black crime is somehow associated with police brutality.
Right.
And I use that word, that term facetiously, because I've made it very clear that there's no such thing. But it's that expectation that I find extremely offensive and problematic. Yep. Not that I'm not willing to, I'm not obligated to. Yeah. There's a big difference in that. Agreed. To me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Melvin.
First, I would like to say, let's go back to the George Floyd comment and why this one is catching all of the attention. I think I could just define it as the perfect storm.
Yeah.
The perfect storm. Had that happened 10, 15 years ago, it would just be another case. Yeah. Just like the ones 10, 15 years ago. We're living in an age and time where cell phones are everywhere, and that is the best line of defense almost for people, okay? Yeah. So you have that. You've got people that are willing to explain it, and you have people that are tired. And Melissa is a highly sensitive person to everything that is going on. Yep. Okay. Yes. And something that I found about myself last year is that I'm very sensitive too. And I didn't know that at first, because I thought sensitive was a particular way, but it's not. You're just more in tune with certain things. And yes. And so I have a whole different respect for that. And what I want to say to you, Melissa, is you don't need to be anything any different than what it is that you are. Those that come into connection with you to receive the word from you is going to get exactly what they need to get from you. You don't have to feel bad that you don't want to talk about it anymore. You don't have to. There's a huge part of that with me too, that I don't. There's also just this side where I have this responsibility of just, let's just put it this. Different personalities can function with different personalities and can't function with other personalities, and would just go crash, boom, hit the wall, done. And so what's coming to mind now, I'm going to bring Marsha's name up again, because when she had her awakening about all of this stuff, another colleague of hers had a more position on it, was more like yours, where she felt like, I don't need to show you anything. But Marsha's personality was strong enough to be curious enough to go out and do the work her own and be okay, because she's strong that way. There are a lot of people who aren't, but they are voices that can speak at the dinner table and say something and correct things. I have a person in mind now who, this is a close friend of mine, who said these words: I like America being great again. Wouldn't that be great? And this was before all the other stuff that happened. And I had to just hold her hand and show her things all the time. At the when things really showed itself, because I was really upset about, I don't want to take this political, but it's never been political about me and why the person in charge shouldn't be the person in charge, because it was just an iconic statement that was just wrong for this part of the humanity, us, even related to the fact that everything that we're talking about really boils down to this: Black people have no voice, and we're not heard, and we're not understood, period. That's what this whole thing is about. And to choose that man was just like, we didn't count. We didn't matter. Our voices didn't matter. Our vote didn't matter. It was like we were non-existent, anything that we've ever said. When she saw stuff happening, when she see the ugliness goes on in the world, she calls me and she's in tears and she goes, "You're right. I didn't know. I didn't see what I saw." And she sees things differently. This lady is also a friend of mine who raised her daughter, her children, in a much different way than some people. And she is that change, and her children are that change. And though her husband is a police officer and has a different opinion, the way that he thinks about the world is not going to be anymore, because there were examples like me in her life to stand up, to show you something different than you've ever seen before. And their kids look at me like, and call me their uncle, because I show up differently. I'm more approachable. They see it, they get it. I'm just an example. So I think everybody on this planet, if you're willing to do the work, is exactly who you need to be for who comes to you to hear the word, whether it's to encourage you or discourage you or however so. We are all playing a beautiful instrument that's coming from us, and there's a tone being rang through each and every one of us to be that perfect storm that brings about change, just like the stuff with George Floyd.
Yeah.
Does that mystical thing kind of make sense? That I kind
Yeah.
of
It makes sense.
No. We followed you. I told you I'd give you a warning if it got too woo-woo or if it got too, if you were losing us. Hey, so let's go ahead and talk about then. We've talked about kind of why unity, and we've talked about what it looks like, and we've expanded on that. So one of the commitments that we've made, Melissa and I, for the season is to make sure we're always actionable in this, right? What are the concrete actions we can take? And so I'm thinking about it on a couple of levels, right? I'm thinking about it in our bubble, in our local community, right? Like right here. What are some of the things that are actionable that moves us toward being more unified? And then I'm thinking about it kind of on a larger scale, if you will, some things that move us toward being more unified. We've already talked about, this basically go learn, right? That we each individually have to take responsibility for getting out there and doing some of the research ourselves. And I love the point you guys made about, looking up the history of the Civil War, not looking up the history of states' rights, right? It's like not only learning the history of racism in this country, but also learning it in a way that gives you the whole accurate picture, not deliberately seeking out sources that are only going to reinforce what you want them to tell you, Melvin, as you said, right? So we talked about that. What are some other ways that you guys are thinking about? Let's keep it at the small level, individual / kind of community, right? What are some of the actions I take to help move us toward being more unified, to help move us toward, dismantling systemic racism?
Well, I think one of you started to talk about that, and I just wanted to kind of reword it another way,
please.
is not just learning, but unlearning. The truth of the matter is, as much as people don't like to talk about this, is even the history that we've been taught has been, it's been untrue. It hasn't been accurate.
Yeah.
There are many stories that have been left out of our history books, out of our education of our children. We never learned about the Black Wall Street. We never learned about the Tulsa race riots. We never learned about Rosewood. We never learned about the revolutions that occurred during slavery because slaves weren't happy. Like we were fed this story that they were well taken care of and they were just servants. And, so you have to be willing to unlearn what you've learned. And that means being open to other accounts, other ideas of history. So I definitely think unlearning. But I think the first and most important thing is what we talked about last week, and I'll harp on that forever, which is using your voice. And in a sense that ties back to what Melvin was saying, that and what you were saying about sharing your stories and things like that. Absolutely not discouraging that. Use your voice, tell your stories. Make sure that you are, where you stand is clear with people. And even if that means that you're unclear, even if you're saying, I don't know what to do, but I want to do something, that shows the willingness that I've been talking about. That shows somebody willing to do the work, which will make other people willing to help you do that work.
Yeah.
You can't just remain silent and think, or make very offensive statements, or make no statements at all, which we've all heard a million times that silence is consent. So if you're not using your voice, then you're not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we need to start, is, that's one very clear way.
Which means people need to go back and listen to last week's episode if they missed
Absolutely.
it. And I want to highlight one thing that you said there, Melissa, about unlearning, and I think that's so critical. And from a learning theory perspective, I'll throw in there that this idea of misconceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning the wrong information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our brain is wired in a way, when you think about how we go about the act of learning as kids and adults, that misconceptions and preconceptions is a really important part. So acknowledging what you think you already know. Mm-hmm. Like you said, going back and relearning what is it actually, but then being aware that old information is still there. Even though you're working on unlearning, it doesn't just go away automatically. And in fact, over time, unless we're really deliberate about it, it will surface again. And we will make assumptions and we will take actions based on that wrong information, because that's just how our brain works. So we have to be really deliberate about the unlearning.
And that's
all of us.
That's everybody.
Yep,
that's right.
All
that's
of us.
All of us.
Absolutely. Melvin, you talked when we had our planning conversation about part of the way, kind of at an individual local level, but that really does impact a larger scale over time. We had to give up, I want to make sure I got the term right, this idea of superior authority. Can you talk a little bit about that, like what it means and what we have to do about it?
Yes, I can talk about that. First, I would like to add to what you were talking about before, and just say that it also takes a person willing to have a conversation with someone else to understand something that they don't already that they don't know.
Absolutely.
They have to be willing to have a conversation and learn something completely different than what they thought moving in. Yeah. I think that's one of the huge things that has to happen. I think that is one of the first things that need to happen, so that some real changes can happen on a local and state level, so that we can have those conversations in front, so that people know. Because I know people that are already doing these things. I've done one myself, and just sitting there with people that were on a board. They said, I didn't know that. And that only happened after being willing to sit down with someone else who has a completely different take on it than you, and to hear it. And these conversations, and this particular one that happened in King George, where changes are happening now, happened because one of the officials said some stuff on Facebook, and someone called him out on it, and it got to this thing, said, let's get together. And they came together and they talked about it, and after a couple of hours, they decided to have continued conversations, bringing on 4 people from each side so they can know more about where the other is.
Right.
And this is happening at our local levels, and hopefully can carry on state and so forth and go on. So it's about having hard conversations. To me, that's what I think is important. Okay. The second part of your question is about this authoritative thing. This shows itself in many, many different ways. This shows itself all the way down to how people treat one another, even if they are the same color, and not supportive of one another because one thinks that they're better than the other. This is an ugly thing, in my opinion, that has been passed down from far ago, and it may have been in the beginning with slaves. And I don't just mean black people as slaves. I just mean as having people below you. Because it has definitely showed itself. I'm good, I'm better. I do know it and can see it through the lens of the slave owner, the plantation owner, and then having below him the overseer. The things were just a little bit different, and then watching the overseer communicate to the field person, to the field Negro, or down to the house Negro. And so this authoritative thing just shows up over and over and over again. You watch you watch the overseer treat, and if you don't know, for those, if you don't want to read books, because I know it's hard for people to read, because there's an interesting stat about after high school, most people never pick up a book again, and if they do, it's probably fiction. So it's really hard for people to read. So you can go watch a movie, you can go watch Roots, you can go see the overseer and how he's treating them and see what goes on, because that overseer is still nothing more today than how the police force started, and you got that authoritative person on top of this savage dog, the way that they try to look at black people. So you got this power struggle thing going on, and I'm tough, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm better than you. You know, I was telling this to someone else, and a former police officer, he agreed with me about what I said. But I said police officers are like dog catchers, and they treat everybody like dogs. The problem is they see most of the people in the world like Labrador retrievers and stuff. They just get a little out of hand, or maybe a mutt or ankle biters. But when they see black people, they see pit bulls, they see Rottweilers. So they go to high force authority, using every single thing that they can to overpower this person. And what I saw when I saw George Floyd die at the knee of that man on his neck, I didn't see someone necessarily going out to quote unquote murder. I saw someone with their hand in their pocket, showing how much better he was. He even said the words, "Don't do drugs, kids," like he knew what was going on with this gentleman. He was just showing you, I'm better, he's beneath me, and watch me with my knee on his neck. And he did it for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and the man died. That authority thing needs to go away. And like I said, it shows itself beyond those situations. It shows itself all the way down to how people treat one another. Like, I'm better than you. And actually, if you look way into it, it's just, you don't think you're really better than anybody anyway. You're just using that because you're scared, because you're less than. And it's nothing but your little scared, whiny little ego.
Yeah.
Very
Thank
true.
you for that. And I appreciate your kind of making that notion of superiority authority clear for us and giving us those examples kind of across across time. And when we spoke about this, I said, a superficial example of it is because it's across it's across every race. It's between races. It's socioeconomic. It's the everything. But I said, a very kind of, and people might disagree with this. I feel like white concept, the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, this idea that I'm always trying to have just a little bit more than my neighbors next door. My car will be a little bit better. My house will be a little bit bigger. My landscaping will be a little bit sharper. And it's that idea that then that makes me just a little bit better, which means that you're beneath me, without even a conscious thought of that, perhaps. But that's the end result. And so getting at, to your point, thank you for digging into that for us, getting at why we feel like we need that. And you got to it. You said it's fear, and it's nothing but that ego at the base of that. We're going to keep talking about things that we can do and blur the lines between like a local level or larger level or what have you. And one of the things I want to throw on the table is, Melissa already talked about using our voices, but this idea of getting involved. Right? Figure out ways in your local community that you are going to get involved. And I talked last time about my kind of revelation about not paying attention to my local political structures, right? And those local political structures result in, creating the laws and the ordinances and all the stuff that we live by every single day. And I haven't been paying attention to them. So being actionable and start to pay attention, right? Start to pay attention to everything around you and get involved with them. How do you do that? You can do that by joining a board, joining a commission. You can do that by sending in emails to your elected officials when they're making decisions that you disagree with, or to support the decisions you think they should make, right? We kind of rely on everybody else to do that, I feel like, right? That magic them. They're taking care of that. Well, there is no them. That's us, right? So those are some of the ways I'm thinking about. What are some others that you guys are thinking about?
Well, I certainly think, while I am a strong proponent of people being able to vote or not vote at their discretion, because it's your right to make that decision, I do think that voting makes a statement. I think that voting sends a message. And so I'm very much I'm a proponent of voting. I think that voting is one of the ways that we can make a difference, campaigning and voting and making our voice heard that way. But even on a smaller level, even on something as simple as calling out people who say things that you know are not true, or that are based on some kind of ignorant stereotype. And I say this thinking mainly of social media, because I think that's how most of us are interacting these days in these COVID-19 times, where we're not hanging out in person, but we're interacting through social media, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. To not be afraid to challenge the people around you. And I think that's one of the reasons, as we talked about last week, that's one of the reasons people stay silent, is because they don't want that friction amongst their friends or their family members, but it's necessary. If you hear them saying racist things, if you hear them making assumptions about someone or something, if you see them, being negative in a way that is adding to the problem and not helping the problem, to speak up, whether it's your best friend, your family member, your spouse, like, it doesn't matter. You have to stand strong in what you believe. So I think speaking up is important, but I also think keeping up the momentum that we have right now, in terms of protesting and, people speaking out and making themselves heard. Like, this momentum has to continue, because we have a very bad problem, especially in the U.S. and through social media, of something getting our attention right in the middle when everything's, and then it just wanes and dies down, and we fall into that, that lull of, what can we do? This is just the way life is, until the next thing happens. And then the next thing happens. And so we have these ups and downs, and I don't think that we're ever going to get anything solved that way. So I think we have to keep some of the momentum going through these different means, voting and using your voice and campaigning and talking to officials and things like that.
That's where the action comes from. Yes, thank you. Yep. Yeah.
I think the protesting has to continue.
Yep.
And that's just what's going to do it. Interesting fact that got presented to me a couple weeks ago was that in the 60s, just to be fair and equal on the bus, it took boycotting the bus a year.
Yep.
A year, and that's just to be able to be in the bus and not in the pack.
Yep.
A year. So just think about that. It has to stay. I feel that it's going to stay. It's going to continue. It's not going to go anywhere, because even in me, something has been activated to say, this is it. This is it. If we don't make the changes and it happen right now, it's never going to happen. So I'm in it, and many other people are too. And like I said, I see people speaking up that never spoke up or said anything before. It amazes me how many people that I see, and I see ones too that aren't speaking up or saying anything.
Yep.
And I'm watching ones too on Facebook just doing nothing but still talking about mortgages and stuff, because they don't want to lose their money.
Yeah.
They're being safe,
Yeah.
But enough is happening, and I'm surprised too. I'm really surprised. I am surprised how many people that I won't comment on their stuff, because I ain't even trying to look at some of the stuff that they say. And they are trying. They come in, they try, and they even like some things, because I really believe they want to find that one thing that helps them see it differently, because it's just gnawing at them. There's like, everybody's got this party going on, and I ain't with it yet. What do I got to learn to be able to figure it out? I really feel that for a lot of people. And of course, there's ones who are just, no way, they're not going to. But we don't need to spend any time with them. We let the extremists take care of the extremists.
Yeah, that's it.
In the middle, there's some stuff that's happening right here, and those are the people that I want to encourage. Those are the people that I want to say thank you to, and go do the work. Go do the work of the highest. This is the work of the highest right here. This situation right here will teach you how to be a decent human being. That's what it's all about.
So oh gosh, I love this so much, and we could talk forever. I want to make sure we talk about a couple more concrete things. I'm going to go back to the local real quick and say another way that people can take action is, I said some of your local political structures. Another way, if you're a parent of a school-age child, get involved with your child's school. Right now, all we can talk about is COVID, and I get that. I'm not saying we can do anything different about that right now. All we can talk about is reopening schools and getting kids back to school and getting, to work and all that, and that is all vital. I'm not dismissing any of that. However, we are also very much, to your point, Melvin, we have some momentum, if you will, around systemic racism in this country like we've never seen before, and we have to leverage it. We have to keep it high. We have to keep pushing it forward. So get involved with your local schools to talk about, be the parent who shows up to PTO meetings. Be the parent, especially now that they're virtual, so it's easier to do.
Yep.
Be the parent who's paying attention to the local school board. Because here's the thing, in your local school districts, there is systemic racism happening, right? There's a reason we have significant achievement gaps. And we're not going to dig into that now because that's coming down the pike in a future
That's
episode.
another one.
But it's going to be really easy for districts not to talk about that right now because they're focused on COVID. So we're going to have to be responsible as parents to bring them to that, right? Even if we let them get till August and open schools or do whatever they're going to do and then do it. But we have to be the ones who say, what are the conversations you're having, Mr. or Mrs. Principal, in the school with teachers about racism and how we're thinking about that in terms of kids? Are you going to be talking to my kid about that? If so, what are you guys going to say? Are you leaving it up to individual teachers? I'm not okay with that. I think that, we need to be sure that every kid has a chance to learn something accurate, for example, etc. So again, we'll come into that later, but just getting involved with your local school and being the voice that says, we're going to need you to talk about this is going to be an important thing. Let's talk about, I think I want to do it in this order. Hopefully this works for both of you. If not, I know both of you will check me on this. Let's talk about why it's critical that this happen. There's just a couple things there that I want to make sure that if we haven't already gotten to them, and if we feel like we did, we're good. Why is it critical that we move forward toward unity? And then I'm hoping we can kind of wrap up with this idea of forgiveness, because you both had some really powerful things to say about this idea of forgiveness. Yes. So why, right? You said earlier, Melvin, there's no end game here, right? Because time goes on indefinitely. But in this moment in time, why is it critical for us right now to be pushing forward toward being more unified?
Okay, I think I'm going to answer that question with a mix of what we were previously talking about what we can do. Because it's important for us to show up as unified as we possibly can. To not see one person better or worse than the other. To not look at a person and see a criminal. To not look at a person and think that someone else is better, okay? I say that because I'm going to tell you another story that happened with a friend of mine whose daughter, let me see how I'm going to tell it without telling too much in case she hears this. Her daughter was with a group of friends. The black-white issue thing came up and how they saw black people. The friend said, the friend of the daughter says, I remember when I was young, we had a party and a watch went missing and my parents weren't there. And at this party, my mom asked me who was at the party. And of all the people that were there, 3 people that were there were black people, and her mom went and questioned the black people. They found out that the watch was actually taken by some white guy. That was one girl's story. Her boyfriend's story was, my parents were never like big racists or anything, and they never said anything like that at all. But when we would go to the gas pump, if there were black people around, my dad would lock the car door. Stuff. And, but they never did that with white people. See, these are little subtle things that happen.
Yep.
Microaggressions.
Okay. They're just little teeny things. Well, my friend's daughter said, mine was different. I remember being on a bus and someone and the girl said that someone said that the N-word was used or something or another. And she came home and she said, Mom, what's the N-word? And her mom said, let me tell you something. Don't you ever say that. I would much rather hear you say the F word than the N-word. So the girl of course, told her mom that story, and the mom was just blown away that that moment had that much of an impact, that this person saw it differently than the other two saw it because of how their parents showed up. So I take that back again to, it's about how your parents show up, because that's where this is.
Yeah.
And it's just little subtle things, those little tiny things, because in this, like I said, in this world where you're going to find whatever it is that you seek. And if someone has already set it up in your mind that black people are criminals, shut the door this way, all you're going to do is just live through life and find another moment and watch some TV show where you see black people as thugs and watch it happen. And then you've got an opinion formed in your mind about how black people are. So to me, it is real important to go past that and to ask yourself why it is that you think what you think and be willing to think something differently so that we can embrace each other and see people as brother and sister. Because in the work that I do, that's the highest work that was given to us by the wisest man. Love God, love your neighbors, yourself. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to realize that that self is yourself. And how would you want to be treated that way, as a golden rule points out?
Yeah.
You should do. So that's...
I appreciate that. Thank you. Melissa, anything you want to add to the why? Like,
I only say, 3 words: America's burning. If we don't do something, it will burn to the ground. And I don't think any of us want that. That's not the way we want things to go. So if we want to fix what's happening in the world, we have to do it. There's no other option other than pure total destruction. So to me, I absolutely agree with what Melvin said, that it's, the microaggressions, and that's going to be a whole nother, I can tell you now, Janice, that's a show I want to do.
oh, I know. I know.
Is the way racism shows up, because I don't think a lot of people understand what it looks like.
That's exactly
They think
right.
that because it's not this in your face calling you the N-word or treating you, with like George Floyd was treated, then racism isn't real.
Yeah.
And there are so many different microaggressions that happen in my life every single day.
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough. Every single day in my life when I interact with other people, that, people don't understand. So I agree, Melvin, completely. I think the answer is just because what we have is not good enough.
Yeah.
That's why we have to do it, because what we have is not good enough.
So, yeah, thank you for that. And, I think one of the important things, we've talked about this with the learning and the unlearning, is sharing resources, right? There's so many out there right now. But one of the things I heard early on, just a few weeks after George Floyd was murdered, because, and it was in the height of not just the protests, but a lot of the rioting, a lot of the looting, a lot of the burning. And it was from Trevor Noah, and so I encourage people to go look it up. I'm sure it's on YouTube. But and it was a clip where he talked about society is a contract, and he was trying to explain why you can't just dismiss looting as thugs and whatever. But he said society is a contract. We basically say, okay, we'll live by a set of laws, and we'll all kind of come to some agreement on what those laws should be, and we'll do our part, we'll contribute positively, and we'll do all this stuff. And in exchange, we then expect to be treated equitably. We expect to actually have a path for the majority of all groups, everybody, right? A path to live a solid middle-class life. And that this, that path should be laid out for us, not laid out as in like handed over, but made clear and be accessible to everybody. Exactly. And we're going to again talk about the education part of that and all that goes with that in a future episode. But he said, but when the contract is broken for a group or groups, when a contract is broken and we're actually not given that, right? We're actually not given access to jobs that pay us well enough to live a solid middle class life, for an example. Our kids are not actually given access to an education that will ensure that they are competitive with all the other kids around them, whether they look like them or not. When our basic resources are met, when I can't actually own anything, the contract is broken. And if we keep doing that, if we keep allowing the contract to be broken, then, as you said, Melissa, then there is no long-term path for us.
That's right.
Because eventually people will fight back in ways
That's right.
that will destroy all of us. And
That's
we all
correct.
own that, right? And so that, for me, from a why perspective, is like, it kind of captures all of that. This idea that, I'm only going to live by your rules if you live up to your end of the bargain. And we have not lived up to our end of the bargain, so to speak, right, in this country. So in our last few minutes, let's talk about forgiveness. What's the role of forgiveness here, right? Because I asked you guys in our planning call about solutions, and we ended up in forgiveness. It wasn't my idea. I hadn't, hadn't thought about that in terms of solutions. So I'd love both of you, in kind of a way of wrapping up your kind of last sentiment here on our conversation today about unity, to talk about how you see the role of forgiveness in all this.
I'll go first so that Melvin, as our guest, can have the last and final word. I think that's apropos.
Yep.
I think there is this notion and this idea and possibly this necessity for Blacks in America to forgive white America for the state that this country is in because of slavery and oppression and all of that, this idea of Black forgiveness. And while I'm not opposed to the idea of Black forgiveness, I think that forgiveness has to be earned. I am not of the mindset that we just go around freely forgiving any and everybody when they've given us no reason to. So I think that when we start seeing substantive change, when we start seeing justice meted out equally, when we start seeing opportunities granted equally, when we see this system truly being dismantled, not just removing Aunt Jemima from the syrup bottle, but truly being dismantled with, police being held accountable when they break laws or take lives. When we start seeing the justice system meted equally, where Blacks and whites who commit the same crimes are given the same sentences, when we see educational opportunities given the same in every neighborhood, regardless of the population, which we know is not happening right now. When we start seeing change like that, then I think forgiveness is possible. Until we see change like that, I think any forgiveness given is done out of this sense of obligation, that it's something people should do, tied to religion or tied to that same idea we had earlier of superior authority, because you think you're supposed to forgive versus it actually being earned. So I think until we get to a place where change happens, I don't think genuine forgiveness can happen.
I'm going to have to agree with Melissa on that one, because she's covering it the same way that I would approach it. But at the same time, it's going to be hard to forgive someone when you're still happening to you. And you can think of some particular thing that happens, but if it's still coming at you and still coming at you and still coming at you, you're not going to be able to forgive, because it hasn't gone. It hasn't stopped. It's going to have to stop first. Of course I can forgive. I'm a very forgiving person, but it has to stop. And I'm a very understanding person. And sometimes, and I don't need one's forgiveness, because I know the freedom of forgiving myself. It keeps me out of the bondage. I don't have a particular need to have someone say, I'm sorry in it, but I do need to see the stuff stop. I think it was interesting that a friend of mine, and a lot of this, like the first slaves that came over here in America came through by the way of Ghana and in Africa. And I had a friend go there, and she said that the elders there just made a lot of effort to say, I'm sorry for what we did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And it's interesting, you don't hear that kind of talk happening in America. And that is like the problem, because America has never made right on the wrongs that happened. They won't even admit that it even happened. And then there are people who even think that slaves are happy and paid until people really understand it and make the right steps. And until it shows up a lot less than it is now, it's going to be hard for forgiveness to be accepted. As much as that is the way for it to be, it's going to be hard because it's got to stop. You can't forgive the dog that bites you when he's still biting you. You can't forgive him. It's still happening. So
and you can't forgive the owner who says, "I'm sorry my dog bit you," but refuses to put it on a leash.
Absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
what I'm taking from this is, as a white woman, it's for my own learning purposes. It is first I have to acknowledge, and then I have to act.
Exactly.
Right? Because for me, even the acknowledging isn't enough. I have to acknowledge, and then I have to act.
And I want to say this, and I swear I do want Melvin to have the last word. So I hope we do give him that for wrap up.
Agreed.
But I want to say, like, this idea of saying I'm sorry. I've seen people say, well, I didn't have slaves, and nobody alive today had slaves. I don't have to apologize for something I didn't do. I don't think there's a black person in America that expects all of their white friends to walk up to them and say, "I'm sorry for slavery."
Nope.
Like, it's not that. It's what you just said, Janice. It's acknowledging that it happened. It's acknowledging how absolutely horrible it was. It's acknowledging that the effects of it is still happening today.
Yes.
In the form of systemic racism. And then it's taking the actions to stop it.
Yes.
Whatever those actions might be. It could be actions as small as, like we said, putting a post on Facebook is better than doing absolutely nothing. So when we say we want atonement, like, don't get me wrong, the fight for reparations is a real thing, and it's a separate issue. What we're talking about on our level is acknowledgement and action, like you said. Those two things. That's what an apology looks like.
Melvin, always, every episode, guest gets the final word. So what is the final word, friend?
The final word is thank you, Janice, because you are the example of the change that we need to see in this world right now. Thank you for being who you are and showing up and acknowledging. I never heard you apologize, but it's all about your actions. It's all about you seeking to understand and not persuade. It's about you actually honestly listening, and I know that you got it, and you're going to do the right thing, and your children are going to be just like you, and the world is going to be different because of people like you.
Absolutely.
The world's going to be different because of people like us. Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Melvin, you don't know it yet, but you're going to be back. We'll let you know when, and you can build that into your schedule. But, we're just going to leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Melissa, one of the most telling things that Melvin said to us for me is something he actually said during our planning call with him. He reminded us, and I've heard this from others, especially in the last couple of months, but the truth is that some things just hit home the most when you hear it from someone you know and care about. That's just how we operate. I think it's how we're wired. And he shared that we all have to be reminded that our connection to slavery, though we like to talk about it as something that happened hundreds of years ago, right, is really much closer than that.
Much closer.
And specifically, he shared with us that it was, he has his grandmother's mother was raised by a freed slave. So his grandmother's mother was raised by a free slave, and that his great-grandmother was raised by a former slave. So people in our generation, right? We are on the cusp of 50, so we're not that old, but people in our generation, we have people in our lives who are connected to people very closely. And so for me, that was really important, and it's something I will share with other people in my everyday conversations to counter the narrative, right? That is, that was so long ago. Why are we still talking about that? We shouldn't, because I feel like in some of my conversations with folks, even though they don't disagree that racism is a problem, they don't feel like we should talk about slavery. So
it's the idea that I wasn't a slave and no one I know was a slave.
Yes.
I didn't own slaves. And so we just need to move on. But we're not thinking about the long-term ramifications of not only slavery, Janice, but also just the civil rights movement in general.
Absolutely.
When you think about it, people, even with Martin Luther King, we tend to think of him as this long ago. He's the same age as Barbara Walters, who's alive and well. And so it wasn't so long ago. Like we just missed it with our births because this was in the 60s.
That's it.
We were born in the 70s. And so within, my mother, my grandmother, like even closer than slavery is the civil rights movement, where we couldn't sit at certain, sit in certain places, couldn't go certain places, couldn't attend schools. So we have to get people to, like you said, realize that this thing is not as far gone or as far back in history as we've been led to believe, or we choose to believe because it's easier for us.
Well, and what's important about that, and you have said that before, and I think that is so important, this idea of our being willing to accept for certain things as true because it's easy for us, right? It's easier, it's more comfortable. But what's, the connection that you just made and that Melvin made, it can hit home, I think, because, we all have grandparents and we knew them to different degrees. And many of us have at least a vague memory of a great grandparent. So when you consider just a couple of generations removed, and to your point, not even, right, when you think about the civil rights movement in this country,
parents.
Right? Our parents, right? In fact, I have a colleague whose mom is 90 who, probably within a week after George Floyd was murdered, when I spoke with her to touch base with her, her mom lives in a nursing home. Of course, she can't see her right now because of COVID. And so she talks to her every day on the phone. And every day she calls her and she's crying because when she, the first time it happened, she was like, "Mom, what is it?" And her response was, "When we marched in the 60s, it was my wish that you wouldn't have to."
Have to do it. I've heard that story so many times, right? Janice, from so many people. I've seen it being said online. Even when we were talking about Gay Abdigo, you can never say her name properly, but she is a civil rights activist in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Oh, right.
Who, alive and well right now today, who could tell you stories that would probably make your skin crawl.
Yeah.
There are living people who still have these stories to tell. So it's very important that we understand that.
And we understand how close that all is. So for me, I feel like it helps to honestly quiet the noise, right? Like to just sit with that fact and that understanding. It helps quiet the noise and make you kind of go, all right, let me focus.
Absolutely.
So for you, right? I mean, Melvin delivered, of course, as he does always. What do you feel like? What were some of the important pieces for you?
Well, I hope one of the things that stood out goes right back to what we said in the intro about Black people not being monoliths. Because Melvin and I have very different opinions about a lot of different things. And I think what it boils down to, without, trying to tie it up in a pretty bow, but what it boils down to is that he is more of an idealist, thinking about the way we want it to be. And I am very much a realist, looking at what it is right now and what it is that I feel needs to be done to get to his ideal, picture. So I thought that, and I didn't expect that going into the conversation. I love Melvin to death, so nothing that we disagreed about was anything personal. But I really, it was interesting to me because I learned a lot from Melvin. He turned a magnifying glass on me, as he has already told me after our recording. The planning meeting, he said, you turned the mirror to me and you made me realize some things, and I can say the very same. So what that did for me was it reinforced that not only are people not monoliths, and I don't just mean Black people, I mean people. Sure. Not only are people not monoliths, but the solution to this thing is not going to be one easy answer either. It's a matter of finding what works and following the different paths. And also, I realized something I hadn't considered was multitasking, because I can do the right now work while still working towards Melvin's ideal, or all of our ideals, really, because that's what we all want. Ultimately, hopefully, that's what most of us want. So I can do both things. Like I have to find a way to, while I'm getting work done right now, still fostering and creating the ideal that we hope to get as well. So that was a big takeaway for me in how I do it, how I'll approach things, even how I word things, because I think, some of the things got a little twisted in our conversation. the idea that I don't want to help people. No, it's not that I don't want to answer questions or help people. It's that I have to see that it's a valid effort.
Yep.
I don't want to just go around being Encyclopedia Britannica for any and every person that has a question.
Right.
So, it made me think, okay, maybe I need to reword how I say,
sure,
that my labor isn't free, or however I've been wording it. So it was very, very interesting for me to have that time with Melvin and to see those different viewpoints.
Yeah, and that was one of the important takeaways for me too, was just the fact that you two don't sit in the same position, in the same spot. You don't have the same perspective, and I feel like that was important. So I think that there was a lot of consensus on kind of what does it mean, the unity part. Mm-hmm. What does it mean, and what can it feel like and look like? And what I loved about the comparison is that you just nailed it. You were kind of very concrete in real time, and he was very kind of more abstract, right? More of like
and it was
bigger.
Very much what it seemed to me is, and this is what I want most people to hear when they hear this interview, is that we share the same end goal.
Yes.
We want the same thing.
Yeah.
We just have different ideas of how to get there.
Yep.
And neither one of our ideas are wrong or bad.
That's it.
Or any of that. And really, we have to work them all.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. There are many paths to the solution. You have to find which one is yours and follow it until we all meet up in the beautiful place.
No, I think I really love that. I think that's a really great way to summarize the conversation. And I think that with every conversation we have this season, it's what's going to continue to become even more and more apparent is how much work and how hard the work. And there's
Absolutely.
a reason that we're sitting here in 2020. And still, if you will, but talking about how the heck do we dismantle racism in this country?
Right.
So there's a reason for that. So I feel like having this conversation with him after our initial conversation last week was really powerful. It was a way to look forward. I appreciated that we got to the whole kind of what can we do, right? I feel like every episode we have to be really diligent about getting to the actions. And I hope folks, I know these episodes are long, but I hope you'll go back and you'll listen really specifically to those parts too, the actual specific actions you can take that we have to be taking in our day-to-day lives. Because if we're not taking any action, God bless you for listening. All 5 of you, but if we're not taking any action, right, then what have we really accomplished? So and of course, as always, we're going to encourage you. The very first action you can take right now is to subscribe to the channel, share this out on your social media, give other people a chance to listen to it. Melissa, any other takeaways from Melvin before I head into our intro for next week?
No, only the one thing you actually said in the intro as well was you said, at this time we're asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I just want to be very clear to the listening audience and even to ourselves that we're not only asking a lot of questions, but we're asking questions to which there are no set, clear answers, which leads us back to the many different paths. But it is the asking of the questions that will hopefully get us to the answers. Yep. It'll help us delve deeper. It'll help us figure out things, and it'll help us see the many different ways we can go. So we're asking questions that will hopefully lead us. So I think that leads me to my final thought is that no action is too small either.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who are like, well, I just don't know what to do. And something as simple as the conversation you had with girlfriends with whom you've never discussed race is an action. The fact that you listen to uncomfortable conversations with a Black man is an action. Yeah. So I want people to understand that no question is stupid. You just got to make sure you're asking the right people. And no action is too small. No action is too small. That's important to me.
I love that. Thank you for really just focusing us in, like laser focused on those two things. I think that's critical. All right. So folks, given our 2 initial conversations, we're going to head next week with episode 16 into a personal story that also begins to help us understand what racism looks like across the subsystems of our larger American system, if you will. To that end, and we hope to do this throughout our entire time in season 2, we'll bring you the story of one young woman and how she and her family encountered racism during her K-12 school experience and how they navigated it. Again, our intention here is to make this conversation and our learning as personal as we can, because we believe that making it personal is what it's going to take to continue to foster the energy and the focus, right? The energy and the focus that were originally unleashed by worldwide protests, to move us beyond protesting to action, right? Getting that energy and focus to stay sustained so that we can move beyond protesting, or inclusive of protesting, but also into action. So our guests next week, Jameson Henry and Joan Williams-Curcio, will help us move toward that goal. We're looking forward to sharing their story with you all. There's a lot to take away from it. So tune in next week for episode 16, and we'll get to it.